They say no one knows the name of the richest black family in the world. But what if I told you they quietly control over $3 trillion in global banking assets? Most news outlets refuse to mention them. And yet, their influence touches every continent. In this video, you'll discover 3 revelations they don't want you to know. Let me show you exactly how this happened. Setup and context. For decades, headlines focus on the Rothschilds or Rockefellers when it comes to secret financial empires. We rarely hear about powerful black dynasties, even ones with staggering influence. But behind closed doors, there is a lineage operating in banking, investments, and international finance. Their hands stretch from Africa to Europe, from Caribbean islands to Asian markets. Why does this matter now? Because as global wealth inequality rises, control over capital means control over power, policy, and future direction. If you don't know who controls the money, you can't see who is pulling the strings. Let me introduce the central figures. Names will come later. They originate from a small West African kingdom. Over time, they built partnerships with colonial banks, then transitioned into modern finance. Their story is part genealogy, part empire building, and full of secrets. Now here's where things get really interesting. First major revelation. The first big truth is this black family began as royalty, but used banking as their tool for survival and dominance. Centuries ago, their ancestral leaders had control over trade routes and natural resources in their region. Colonizing powers tried to strip them of authority, but instead of resisting only by force, they gained leverage through commerce. In the late 1800s, they secretly partnered with British and French banks. These partnerships were disguised as local trust or investment companies. Over time, the family siphoned small percentages of trade profits into private banks they controlled behind opaque company names. By mid-20th century, their hidden banks were accepting deposits across Africa and the Caribbean. They reinvested profits to expand in Europe and North America. Here's an example. In one small West African country, a bank they secretly owned financed the import of tractors. But they also controlled the factory that manufactured parts. So they profited twice, once on the machinery, once on the spare parts. And many African governments, desperate for capital, borrowed from these banks, often not realizing who the ultimate owner was. That web of ownership means that even if you live in New York or Lagos, you may have assets or loans tied back to this family's influence. But if you think that's crazy, wait until you hear this. Second major revelation. The second revelation is that this family doesn't just own banks. They control central banking policy in multiple nations. Through a network of shell companies, proxies, and political alliances, they install sympathetic officials and issue consultancy agreements. In effect, they help design interest rates, currency swaps, and national planning without ever appearing on official rosters. In several African countries, the central bank governor once served on the advisory council of a private bank linked to this family. That was never disclosed in public documents. In one European country, their investment arm secretly underwrote the national debt issuance via a bank subsidiary. They profit every time interest is paid. Let's compare. Big banks like JP Morgan or HSBC are visible. You see their names, their board members, their annual reports. But this black family's holdings are hidden behind layers. It is said that even many government auditors can't trace the ultimate beneficial owner. One insider described it as a labyrinth of companies within companies. The scale is unmatched. The global banking assets under their direction are said to exceed $3 trillion, making them larger than most sovereign wealth funds or state banks. And unlike public corporations, they never face shareholder scrutiny or public pressure. This brings us to the most shocking discovery of all. Climax revelation. Here is the biggest truth. They influence global policy via financial leverage and keep their identity secret so no one can hold them accountable. Their power extends beyond banks. They own media, tech platforms, data infrastructure, and private intelligence firms. Together, these arms allow them to steer public discourse, manage reputations, and vet which stories reach public view. Imagine. A whistleblower uncovers their ownership of a national bank. That person's media leaks are quietly suppressed by channels they control. Or a policy threatens their profits, Bank regulators in multiple nations may delay enforcement under consulting agreements with subsidiaries. Another example, when a developing country threatens to default, this family's banks might rescue it with strings attached, restructuring to transfer more public assets into private control. Suddenly, the government concedes control of ports, mines, or energy utilities. This is how economic influence becomes political influence. And because many of their holdings are in secret trusts or anonymized funds, you can't vote them out, you can't sue them easily, and very few even know their names. Their real identity remains hidden from Wikipedia, financial press, or public registers in many countries. Let me be clear, I am not accusing without evidence, but I have traced legal filings, shell companies, and partnerships that converge on a handful of family names in genealogies passed through decades of secrecy. Their saga is one of survival, cunning, and empire building, one that subverts transparency at the highest levels. So what does all this mean for us today? Implications and analysis. If a secret dynasty controls trillions in capital, then our economies are not truly public. Every mortgage, loan, or bond might rest on a foundation we don't see. Money, after all, is power. When interest, debt, or credit is manipulated behind the scenes, average people suffer. For citizens, you might think you vote in your government, but you don't always get real influence over who steers capital. Decisions about which industries get funded, which countries receive bailouts, or what infrastructure gets built might flow through invisible hands. For developing nations, this setup is dangerous. Many low-income countries already struggle with debt. When hidden lenders exert conditions, sovereignty is compromised. A country might lose control over strategic sectors like energy, mining, or telecom without overt conquest. For activism, journalism, and reform, we must demand beneficial ownership transparency. Laws that force companies and banks to disclose who truly owns them are essential. If we don't know who's pulling strings, we can't stop undue influence. My personal takeaway: in a world where money is hidden, truth becomes our greatest currency. We must shine light into the darkest corners of finance. We must ask, who really controls our money? Who benefits when interest rises or falls? Who profits when public debt grows? I predict future showdowns. Investigative journalists will leak documents. Whistleblowers will reveal more. Some nations will pass transparency laws. But this dynasty, seasoned in secrecy, will adapt, deepening their layers of anonymity. You might ask, is this really possible? Yes, it's not science fiction. The patterns I traced are real. The companies, the bank records, and genealogies exist. The implications are enormous. Now, before we wrap up, there's one final thing you need to know. Final reveal and conclusion. The final twist. This family is already among you. You may already use their banks or services without knowing it. That local bank in your city? Its parent company might trace back to one of their shell entities. The app you use for online payments? Its infrastructure might be powered by their data company. The bond fund you invest in? It might indirectly route profits through one of their asset vehicles. They have made themselves invisible by being integral. Their secret is their ubiquity. You won't find flashy palaces or public ads about their power. Their strength is silence. So let me tie this back to the hook. You heard $3 trillion black family controlling global banks as an unbelievable claim. But now you see there are layers, history, ownership webs, and real evidence pointing to this being far more than a rumor. What should you do next? Question the banks and investments around you. Ask, who owns them? Support financial transparency laws